Let me get this clear right off the bat. You do not need to watch any of the other Fate series or play the mobile game as a prerequisite to watch this anime. Yes, sure, it would be helpful, but it is by no means needed to understand the story that we'll see in Fate Grand Order Babylonia. Still though, given the complex nature of the Fate universe itself, I figure that whether you're a veteran or a newcomer, a general overview of Fate Grand Order would be helpful. So, what is Fate Grand Order? And more importantly, how does it relate to the anime Fate Grand Order Babylonia? Well, let's start with the basics. Fate Grand Order is centered around a secret agency known as the Organization for the Preservation of Human Order, Finis Chaldea, or just Chaldea for short. And it operates with the sole purpose of preserving humanity's existence for as long as possible. In order to understand how it does this, you first need to understand how Chaldea came to be, because there's a bunch of supernatural phenomenon that comes into play here. So, back in 2004, there was an event known as the Fuyuki Holy Grail War, and if you've been around Fate in any capacity, I'm sure you've heard the words Holy Grail War before. It's essentially a massive battle royale, involving pairs of what are known as masters and servants. Each pair will compete against each other until only one remains, at which point the victor will gain ownership over the Holy Grail, an ancient magical object from the time of Jesus Christ, linking to what's pretty much an infinite source of mana, making it capable of granting the winners a single wish. Thus why it's such a coveted object. But not just anyone can compete for it. In order to participate in the Holy Grail War, you must first have the potential to be a master, a potential that is most often defined by a person's prowess with magecraft, aka magical science. Meaning that most masters in the war are typically proficient magi who have a strong affinity for magecraft, and it's that affinity that makes them worthy candidates to form a contract with what would be known as their servant. Reason being that servants aren't simply just human, they're something more, much more. They're mainly what we like to call heroic spirits, beings given physical form into what can only be classified as familiars of the highest rank. Now, this is where things get interesting, because heroic spirits are, in my opinion, what makes Fate so fun to watch. You see, a heroic spirit refers to the souls of people who had achieved such legendary feats in their lifetime that their stories became immortalized through legend. They could be gods, mythological heroes, famed beasts, or even mere humans. Any being that has left behind a great enough achievement that allows them to be remembered all throughout the unrelenting flow of time is capable of ascending to the status of heroic spirit, regardless of whether they actually existed or not. What I mean is that, whether they were actual historical figures or just figments produced in myth, so long as people believe they existed, they can become a heroic spirit. For example, I'm sure you're all familiar with Saber. This is King Arthur, a true historical figure whose role in the defense of Britain against the Saxon invasion resulted in the creation of countless legends and tales that are still told today. On the other hand, this is Frankenstein, a fictional character brought to life through the famed novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And just like her and Saber, there are over 200 servants from across time and space that exist within the Fate universe, each with their own unique powers and abilities. But only a select few we've actually seen battle it out in the Holy Grail War. So now knowing this, what we have is a battle royale between pairs of masters and servants for the wish-granting artifact of the Holy Grail. And as I was saying in the beginning, in the year 2004, a Holy Grail War began in the small city known as Fuyuki. In the Fate Grand Order timeline, the winner of this war was a man named Martisbury Animisphère, and with his victory, he wished for prosperity. This gave him all the resources that he needed in order to build the organization that we now know as Chaldea. Something Martisbury knew humanity needed, since somehow he was warned that humanity's existence was nearing its end. So with his now copious amounts of assets, he was able to make Chaldea into an international organization that would flourish over time. It became a research facility, where the world's leading scientists and magi would work together to make leaps and bounds towards the advancement of magecraft and science, eventually leading to the creation of technology that would allow them to observe both the past and the future. This due to a combination of projects that are each a technological feat in their own right. But rather than explain how each of them work, it's probably best that you just know what each do. First we have Chaldeus, not to be confused with the name of the organization, Chaldea. There's a difference. Chaldeus is a perfectly accurate miniature replica of planet Earth that represents the status of the world as it is in both the past and the future. However, that alone isn't enough to sufficiently observe different periods of time. That's where the Shiba lens comes in. This allows for a detailed observation of the past and future statuses displayed on Chaldeus. Then there's a separate invention called Laplace that works in tandem with the Shiba lens to collect records related to those statuses. So it's best to think of it like this. Chaldeus displays the state of the world across all eras, past or present. The Shiba lens can look into any single one of them and collect more data, while Laplace can directly monitor them through a real-time link between the present and the specified time period. Now, you're probably wondering why the ability to monitor the past is needed to save the future. Well, that's because of the nature of the mass extinction events that are threatening humanity. They're known as singularities, events that have happened in the past but at the same time threaten the future. Reason being that a singularity is a region that Chaldeus is unable to observe, meaning it's an event in history that shouldn't exist in the first place. A disruption in the true historical timeline that causes disturbances and fluctuations in the flow of time that spread throughout history like a wave. If the disruption is significant enough, the shift in the true historical timeline will result in the collapse of human history as a whole. Consider it like a butterfly effect that inevitably leads to human extinction. But how do these disruptions happen? Well, without going too much into spoilers, a holy grail has been purposefully spawned into a key historical time period and given to a specific individual who is likely to cause as big of a negative disruption to history as possible. Not only that, but this grail also allows for servants to be summoned without the support of a master. Normally, a master would be needed for a servant to maintain their existence in the world. But with a grail from a singularity, various servants can be brought into the era without either the summoning ritual or the master. It's these servants that make the singularities more interesting, because they will often choose a side and play a role in either disrupting the grand order of human history or working to restore it. So where does Chaldea fit into all of this? Well, Chaldeus, the model of the world that represents its state in both the past and the future, in combination with the Shiba lens, can pinpoint the exact times in history when a singularity has taken place. If Chaldeus no longer displays the light of the world, that means that humanity's existence is no longer secured and a singularity has occurred. Then, using the Shiba lens, they can detect when and where that singularity has appeared, while at the same time determine when humanity's extinction will happen. So what we have are destabilizing events to the grand order of human history and a means to detect them. The next step would then be to prevent these disruptions from happening. But you're probably wondering that if it's something that's taken place in the past, then hasn't it technically already happened? Well, yes, but it can still be prevented. Such a massive shift in the true timeline of human history is something that isn't so easily integrated into the world. What I mean by that is that it takes a significant amount of time and magical energy to fully cement the changes from a singularity to the true historical timeline. That's where Chaldea can now step in to prevent the singularity from ever happening. By using what's essentially time travel, Chaldea can project the spirit of a living human to the past. It's through a process known as race shifting, a term that you'll hear now and again throughout the series. The process also involves giving that person's spirit a physical form so that they can interact with the people and environment around them. This gives the person who was sent back to the past the ability to directly intervene with historical events. So, in the event of a singularity, Chaldea would race shift a master to where and when it happens. Upon arrival, they will proceed to do everything in their power to prevent the historical anomaly from taking place. This can be done through one of two ways. Eliminate any and all disruptions that are a direct cause of the singularity, or either retrieve or destroy the grail that is supporting the singularity's existence. Cause remember, the whole reason the singularity is taking place is because a grail is providing copious amounts of magical energy to disrupt history. Though sometimes in very extreme cases, both goals may need to be accomplished. Now, a master is certainly not powerful enough to take on the enemies within the singularity by themselves, which is why under normal circumstances, a master would typically form a contract with an existing servant, bring their own servant from a summoning ritual done at Chaldea, or summon their own after being race shifted to the singularity. Bringing us back to when I mentioned that servants would often choose sides as to whether they wanted to fight for humanity or destroy it. So pretty much, it's this team of master and servant that would fight together to eliminate any rogue servants as well as locate the source of the disruptions. And this process actually worked well for a while. The master teams that were sent to battle the Singularities proved to be quite competent at their jobs. No one Singularity was too tough for them to handle. But even after beating Singularity after Singularity, for some reason the extinction of humanity was still imminent. They were unable to bring back the light of Chaldeus that ensured humanity's survival. Chaldea had to bolster their ranks. They began to recruit more masters, eventually gaining a total of 48. Most were either prestigious mages from famous bloodlines or magi in training trying to make a name for themselves. These were hand-picked individuals. However, there were also 10 slots available to the public for anyone to apply to, one of which was taken by our protagonist, Ritsuka Fujimaru, boasting absolutely zero skills in magecraft or combat whatsoever. He is simply an average person. That's not to say that he can't use magecraft though. It's just he's untrained and doesn't know how to. Not only that, but he's also completely unfamiliar with any of the concepts that I just spent the last 10 minutes talking about. Holy Grail Wars, Servants, the Grand Order, race shifting, these are all things that he knows nothing about. Yet, despite all of this, he would soon prove to be one of humanity's greatest assets, and a key member within the Chaldea organization, a role befitting our main character. So why do we follow this average master when there are 47 other better candidates? Well, that's a question that brings us to the very beginning of the story that is Fate Grand Order. Assuming that you haven't seen the Prologue anime adaptation from 2016 called First Order, we find Ritsuka unconscious in the halls of Chaldea as he had been sleepwalking after not properly waking up from an introductory battle simulation. Here he is found by Mashu and her friend Fo. They quickly become acquainted and she basically explains what Chaldea does and how it functions as an organization. She then takes him to the location of the orientation speech being given by the current director, Olga Marie Animusphere, which Ritsuka inevitably falls asleep in and is kicked out of. With nothing else to do, he's guided to his room where he comes across the head doctor, Ramani Arkaman. Shortly after their introductions though, a loud explosion could be heard from the direction of the command room. As it would turn out, a massive explosion had taken place right in the heart of where the Chaldea crew was about to begin the race shifting process for the other 47 masters to the singularity known as Singularity F, a distorted version of the Fuyuki Holy Grail War that became unobservable by Chaldeus, thus flagging it as the source of the path towards human extinction. Ritsuka rushes down to the central area, where he sees all the other masters scattered across the rubble while in their Spiritron chassis, aka coffins, a device used to significantly improve the odds of success during the race shifting process. In the distance, he spots Mashu pinned under a pile of rubble. Despite knowing that attempting to save her would be futile, he tries anyway, until eventually realizing that it didn't matter since they were trapped in the room. Knowing that there was nothing left that he could do, he simply accepts his fate and waits alongside Mashu as the rest of the room crumbles around them, taking Mashu's hand as the only thing he could give her now was a little bit of comfort. Unbeknownst to him though, the race shift process was still ongoing, and given that Ritsuka was the only valid master left in the room, both he and Mashu were race shifted to 2004 right in the middle of Singularity F. Except Mashu was a little bit different here. Now she was a fully fledged demi-servant, a fusion between a heroic spirit and a human body. You see, Mashu had been at Chaldea for a long time. In fact, she was a human experiment there. A child created from modified DNA in order to become a vessel for a heroic spirit's soul. Countless experiments were run on numerous designer babies like her in an attempt to create a successful fusion between a heroic spirit and a human. But all except for her ended up just failing. Finally, in the year 2010, when Masha was just 10 years old, the demi-servant experiment was a success. Chaldea had successfully summoned a heroic spirit and binded it to Masha. But something was wrong. The heroic spirit they summoned never actually awoke. As it would turn out, Mashu had been fused with the spirit of the Knight of the Round Table known as Galahad, and when Galahad saw that Chaldea was performing these experiments on an innocent girl, he denounced their actions and went into a state of absence, something akin to hibernation if you will. The reason he didn't just outright release his spirit from the world is because he came to realize that Mashu would die from it. He saw no other choice but to passively reside within Mashu but never actually awaken, at least until Mashu's life was in danger. As she was dying while pinned under the rubble, Galahad presented himself to her, and he formed a contract allowing Mashu to become the demi-servant that we see now. From this, Mashu gained not only his fighting experience and skills but also his noble phantasm, which in case you didn't know is pretty much every servant's ultimate ability. Though after the contract was made, Galahad's existence seemed to fade away. So now we have a master and servant pair who find themselves in a singularity. Given that all the other masters were incapacitated, that meant that it was solely up to Ritsuka and Mashu to defeat whatever was causing Singularity F. Luckily, he was able to get guidance from Chaldea, since Laplace also gives them the ability to communicate in real time across eras. Even the director herself was ray-shifted alongside them. But rather than focus on the specifics of this singularity, all you pretty much need to know is that Ritsuka and Mashu successfully eliminated the source of the distortion. This mission was known as the First Order, and if you want to know the rest of the details behind it, you can actually watch the anime version of it via the special episode called Fate Grand Order First Order, which I highly recommend since it puts together everything that I've been talking about into a nicely condensed story. But it's after the events of this initial threat that Ritsuka and Mashu return to find that there are 7 more singularities flagged by Chaldeus, each of which threaten the very foundations of humanity, and Ritsuka and Mashu are in charge of handling all of them. Now, that's where Fate Grand Order Babylonia comes in. This anime that's airing this season is the 7th singularity, and it will follow Ritsuka and Mashu as they work together to save mankind once and for all. You see, if you watched episode 0 that came out a few months ago, towards the end of it, there was a compilation of scenes that showed snippets from each of the previous 6 singularities. A fantastic scene if you're familiar with the series as a whole. But what this means is that Ritsuka and Mashu have already taken care of 6 of the 7 singularities threatening humanity. And this is the final one that they need to get rid of in order to bring human history back to its true order, thus saving humanity from extinction. And that's pretty much what you need to know to really understand what's going on in the show. Overall though, if you want to get the most out of this anime, just watch Fate Grand Order First Order, then episode 0 of Babylonia right after. After that, you should have a pretty good idea of where things are and why things are happening. Anyway, I hope this explanation wasn't too confusing. The Fate universe isn't really something that can be so easily summarized, but I gave it my best shot anyway. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Pedro, Noble, Absolute Zero, Alpha Assassin, Deveronia, and Nicox for helping out with the research. So if you did like this Fate content though, following this up will be a bunch of servant spotlights for the ones that we see in Babylonia. Expect a Caster Gilgamesh video coming out soon. But until then, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So until next time, ciao!